This is the Bama Podcast with Marty Solomon. I'm his co-host, Brent Billings. Today we continue our discussion of Season 4 of The Chosen with Episode 6, Dedication.
Yep. Yeah, I was trying to think if I had any intro comments to make about this episode, and I don't think I did. I'm ready for a spoiler horn.
Fun episode, I'll say that much, and also a long episode. So yeah, I think we should get right into it.
All right, good enough.
So we start off with this empty room. We see some candles burning. Everyone comes in carrying Big James. It's kind of chaos. Jesus sees a paper on the floor, picks it up, is kind of frozen by whatever the message is, and then everyone's like, what's going on? And what's going on? Everybody's confused. And then Z sees somebody outside. He shouts for everybody to like calm down or whatever. And then it goes into the credits from there.
Yeah, I remember being like totally befuddled watching this scene. I'm trying to remember if it's this scene where my son was like, did this really happen in the Bible? And I'm like, son, I have no idea what's going on right now. It ended up being okay, but I was like, what is happening? What is happening with this season of The Chosen? But yes, good enough. Credits it is.
So then we jump back 7 days, and Thomas is lighting a candle. The disciples and Jesus are reciting Psalm 113, and then Jesus is narrating this whole story. Turns out it's Hanukkah, so they're doing the whole history, basically the Silent Ears portion of the Bama Podcast, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Andrew is playing Alexander the Great, or as they call him, Alexander the Worst, which I don't know why we never thought about that, but that is a fantastic name for him.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to Ray. I remember doing the Herod the Great versus Herod the Wicked, but I never thought about it with Alexander. Sure.
Yeah, and Andrew's really into it. I mean, I can't even imagine how much fun they had filming these scenes.
Sure.
So great. Z was really getting into his role as Antiochus. They're reciting, all kinds of stuff, Psalm 114 after that. They're exchanging gifts. The one that I appreciated the most was Matthew hugging John. After John gave him a quill, Matthew gave John parchment, and they're just talking about, hey, I'm so glad that I'm not the only one writing this down. So keep up the good work, which I thought was great.
Yeah, they have done a good job inserting that. I find it interesting throughout the shots you'll have of them holding like their records and their books. That I find that interesting, but I do love the idea they're pulling out the authors of those gospels. And I'm assuming that a lot of people catch it and follow it. Feast of Dedication is also what we'll know later in history as Hanukkah. So if that helps people place some of that stuff, they call it appropriately the Feast of Dedication within the episode, which is what it was while the temple was standing back in Second Temple Judaism. So that all makes sense, but some people sometimes don't connect those two and realize that those are really the same feast, same celebration. Obviously, probably looked different 2,000 years ago than it does today, but same concept and idea.
So then Jesus continues with the narration. Antiochus forces the Jews to eat the pig flesh. The Maccabees rise up. They reclaim Jerusalem. Only enough oil for 1 day, but it burns for 8. They recite Psalm 116, and then they're singing songs, and then it's Psalm 118. So they're going through the whole list of Psalms. That's all tied to the Feast of Dedication, right? Those Psalms are, or
yeah,
those?
Yeah, those would be the song. Yeah, should be. I think those are appropriately placed. Yeah, absolutely.
I wasn't completely clear when I was looking into it if that was a Hanukkah tradition or if that went back to Feast of Dedication or not. So
yeah,
I think it does.
I did do a Hanukkah video. Was it last year, I believe, on the Festival Edition playlist over on YouTube, and I used my son's presentation from his bar mitzvah. Like my son for his bar mitzvah, his project was to talk about Hanukkah and bring that practice into our families. Observance and practice. And so I just used his notes. Like I literally used his PowerPoint to do a YouTube video for Hanukkah last year. So if we wanted to link that in the show notes, if anybody wants a deeper, I don't know if it's a deeper dive, but more dive on Hanukkah, they could look at that.
Perfect. So then we have the arm wrestling between John and Andrew Andrew wins. I do wonder, like, surely they were actually doing it, but like, would Andrew have won, or was that script? I don't know. Was it even scripted that way? I don't know. Were they like, let's just see who gets it?
Good question. Fascinating. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. My whole thought was like, boy, they're always fighting about who's the greatest. This is a recipe for disaster for Jesus to be sitting right there. I'm like, this isn't going to end well.
But I love the Jesus line. Even I didn't see that coming.
Yep. I believe they've used that before and that came back again.
Yeah. But Jesus says, they're going to get ready to go to Jerusalem. He's going to give a teaching. Thomas is concerned about how it went the last time he did that. But Jesus retires and the party continues. And now Mary and Tamar begin arm wrestling. And so the fun does not stop.
Yeah, I definitely homed in on the Thomas scene. He's obviously super quiet. As soon as Jesus starts talking about that, kind of distant, disconnected. I thought that line, actually wrote that line out because of how it hit me in the episode. Last time it was not acceptable. Or maybe that's later. Is that later? Is that a later quote from a later scene? When they're walking, last time it was not acceptable for us to be there. What makes us think, or was that was that the scene you were just referencing, Brent?
I can't remember if it was that one or yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't write that down specifically.
Yeah. Did hit me though, the way he said that and who said it. And I finally came to an appreciation during this episode, maybe next episode, of like, okay, I appreciate how they have leveraged the Rhema story that was harder for me to swallow earlier, like how they've built that into the Thomas narrative and backstory. I have come to appreciate. I'm like, okay, I see that. It makes that real, and it makes that something I can connect to. So good enough.
So then I think it's the next day or something. Andrew is talking about how much he loves his new belt from Peter. And I love how they're working all this stuff in with Matthew. Andrew's like, hey, are you going to record that Peter got me a new belt? And Matthew's like, no.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And then Big James brings up the idea of getting something for Thomas. And they're like, it can't be, something silly because he's not having the greatest time. So it's got to be something that actually means something. So they're trying to figure that out. And Matthew checks the purse to see if they have the money for, they came up with the idea of getting him some new shoes that would be more appropriate for all the long journeys that they're taking. And Matthew checks the purse and it is not as full as it should be. So Matthew goes out and finds Judas and shares the idea about the shoes. And Judas is like, well, Thomas's shoes that he has are worth so much, like you could trade for 3 pairs of shoes. And Matthew's like, yeah, but we've got money for gifts, but maybe where's the rest of it?
Yeah.
And Judas gets super defensive. And Matthew's like, I don't know, man. I don't want to, I'm not trying to take your job, but the numbers don't lie. And Judas just frustrated that there's not going to be enough for Jesus to succeed with his mission of bringing the kingdom.
Yeah. The 2 numbers, guys. I liked how that collided. Yep. Good stuff. I was trying to remember if it was one of the synoptics records that it was Judas who was stealing from the purse. And I'm trying to remember if that was Luke or if that was Matthew, but
oh gosh, let me look that up. It was actually John 12.
Oh, I was wrong on both accounts. Not Matthew or Luke. It wasn't even a synoptic. Man, I was so confident.
Well, yeah, it is interesting that it's not Matthew, considering how they're portraying it in this episode.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, because that would have made sense for it to be there, but whatever. I'm just really appreciating Judas's. I mean, we're seeing more and more of this from Judas, where he, clearly doesn't get it, clearly thinks he knows a better way than Jesus, but he is obviously just so dedicated to the mission and just wants to see it happen. And he's just so frustrated that it's not happening as soon as he would like or in the way that he would like.
Yeah.
And I just think they're doing a great job with that.
Yeah, I do like how that's setting itself up. I like your statement, your phrase you used there, blinded by the mission, or so committed to the mission, blinded by his ideology. I just wish it was easier to relate to that in our world today.
Yeah, that's too bad.
Jeez. Wow.
Well, maybe we should be more like Yusuf. He's studying away.
Yeah, there you
and
go.
His father enters. Arnon, is that his father's name? Was that right?
Arnon, yeah, absolutely.
And he asks him about the Matthew 7 thing, like, hey, if I asked you for bread, would you give me a stone? And his dad's like, what?
Yeah.
He's like, what are you doing here? What's going on? He's totally confused. But Yusuf's like, hey, please just stick with me. And he's like, yeah, of course, I totally will. So I think, more to come on that situation for sure.
Yeah, that whole scene, I really liked it. I loved his, I always admire, there was a really good, father-son conversation that happened here, just in the midst of the scene, just on those terms by itself. When he first showed up, I'm like, oh, this is going to be one of those jerk guys. His father's going to be a total jerk. And ended up having this pretty meaningful conversation. I always believed in you. And you're like, okay, does he really mean that? And you get the sense through this scene, no, he really does mean that. He may not know where this whole story is going to head, or I don't know what they're going to do with his character later, but I admired you. He had this admiration for Yusuf. And I just really liked that scene between father and son. And I'm really looking forward to his character and how it might be used in the future with the other seasons.
Yeah, it definitely had me thinking about what are my boys going to get into when they're older?
Sure.
Where I don't understand what they're doing, but I'm going to am I going to have that same level of commitment to supporting them in whatever way? So
yeah,
is a good one. Then we see Peter distracting Thomas in the market, asking for help with soap. Thomas says, he's supposed to feel grateful during a feast, and he appreciates when they have important work to do. He can focus on that. But Peter, empathizes with Thomas's aching soul as much as he can. He tries to relate to Thomas, and he had some of the same thoughts that Thomas does about the thoughts, the questions, the trials that they're facing. And Thomas he's just like, man, I just can't understand why Jesus didn't help Rama. And Peter brings up Isaiah 55, and Thomas is like, no, I know those words, they don't help me.
Right.
But then they kind of break that tension, because Peter had said that he has no sense of smell, and Thomas is, variously throughout the scenes asking him what things are, and Peter gets it wrong every time. And so Thomas says he's a lost cause, but they move on.
Yeah, I thought, there was a lot of, and they did eventually break that tension, but some really good tension that honestly, I wasn't even sure where I was falling in the midst of the conversation. The quote from Peter I wrote down, it's not wrong to wrestle, but it becomes wrong when you don't accept the answer. And I'm like, man, do I love that? Do I hate that? Do I, I just that was a statement that was sticking around in my notebook, and then it kind of continued. And eventually Thomas, pretty frustrated and angry, understandably so. Don't throw around scraps of scripture, of text.
Scraps of prophets, I think maybe is what he said.
Yeah, scraps of the prophets. Don't throw around scraps of the prophets. Were they any help to you? Referencing Peter's own. And I thought, man, this is so relatable. And a tension that maybe, I even think of the story in the book of Job, maybe it's not even a tension that gets resolved. But it is the tension of grief, of struggle, of questioning. Really, it's that same tension that Job's stuck in the middle of. He's not cursing God. He's got some friends that are like, hey, you're they probably would have echoed Peter. It becomes wrong when you don't accept the answer. I'm feeling anyway, the tension itself is just really, I was like, yeah, that's very relatable. Not comfortable for me as a viewer, but in the best kind of way. So love it.
So then we have a brief scene where we see a letter being delivered to Jairus from Yusuf. We'll get back to that later. But then the disciples are reciting Psalm 115, and they give Thomas his new shoes. Matthew and Judas exchange some looks at that point. Matthew's like, come on, man, we had to do it. I assume that the way that Matthew looked meant that they actually ended up paying for them instead of doing some kind of barter. How did you read that, Marty?
Yeah, I had the same question. I almost assumed, because of the other earlier references, that there was it was a barter. There's one scene later where they make eye contact with Judas after they present the sandals, and Judas doesn't seem furious or mad, which made me think, okay, they found a way to do it anyway. And it was and I assumed it was a barter situation, not a spend a bunch of money thing. They said that's what they were going to go do, so I just kind of assumed that, but I don't know.
Well, yeah, what I'm thinking about is Matthew is like, hey, we have a budget set aside for gifts, so he knows that there's supposed to be money for it.
Sure.
And then Matthew did take the purse with him. They didn't show him going back in the house to put it away after they all left for the market. So I thought he still had it.
He does, but he says to one of the disciples, we'll have to barter.
Oh, yeah, he does, huh?
And one of the disciples like, oh, is Judas being stingy? And yeah. So, and I don't anticipate Matthew being the kind of guy that's going to go out and, as they portray him, change his mind, be like, never mind, we'll spend the money.
Nope, you're right. I forgot about that part. So then we see a woman delivering a letter to Jesus. She says it's from the other side of the Jordan. Jesus reads it, crumples it up. Peter gets up and asks him what's going on. He says Lazarus is very sick. They go through the whole, what is it, John 10 or John 11, something like that, where where he's saying like, oh, this isn't a sickness that leads to death. Lot of John 10 and 11 going on in this episode.
Yeah, and they worked it in really seamlessly too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was great.
Yep. Yeah, the way they did it was perfect. But Jesus retires at that point, encourages everyone to continue the party, and then everyone's teaching Tamar the Song of Miriam. And then we see Jesus is struggling to sleep, as you might imagine.
Yeah, and that was like, that's the shot where, you know how often I've talked about God goggles, but if Jesus has got God goggles, that's the God goggles that it's the same God goggles we would have. It's this fervent, he's got this prayer life. He's being led by God. Like if he's got some special insight of what's coming, it's because of that. It's because of that prayer life and that connection with God the Father. Not just because in his divine nature he can see everything, but because he does have this like vibrant prayer life. And I've made that comment before, but I know some people have still not heard me make that connection. So that was a shot and a scene where I'm like, there you go. That's it. That's where, if he's got special insight, that's the kind of insight that he has. That's where it's coming from. The same kind of insight that a Brent or a Marty or any one of us could have, because we have a strong, vibrant, alive relationship with the Holy Spirit, with God, and just obviously I like the humanity of his wrestling and his struggling, but I also like this insight into, he does have an active prayer life that's working, and it's leading him. So love that.
Then we're with the disciples threshing grain, grinding flour. The way Judas says it is they're thrashing and winnowing. So I don't know if I have all the right terms for any of this stuff, but they're working on the grain. And Judas shares his idea of wanting to set up donation points, get them out of the tedious work that they're doing right now. He cannot believe that people won't get on board with this idea. They're like, how can you all want to do this?
Yeah.
But little James quotes Ecclesiastes 3, and then he appears to be in some pain. So that kind of like dissipates the conversation a bit. But then we see Judas is eating alone, and John kind of notices him, joins him.
Yep.
They're talking about, John is saying like, hey, I misunderstood some things at some point.
Yeah.
And I think Judas said something like, like you got in trouble for it. And he's like, well, it wasn't so much that we got in trouble, is that like Jesus was disappointed that we didn't get it.
Yeah.
If you misunderstand what the mission is, then you're going to ask for the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And Judas is just frustrated. He's like, I'm trying to understand. I just want to build the kingdom. And John is like, man, I don't question your intentions. Why don't you just ask Jesus about it?
And I appreciated I liked that John saw him, that he had empathy, that he went over. This is John, the disciple whom Jesus loves, but also John, who learns how to love, becomes the love guy, the love apostle, the love disciple. His letters are full of love and truth. So you kind of see that embodied in his response. I love just the interplay of two disciples with two different kinds of understanding, like wrestling, like, what if it's this? What if it's this? Am I right? Am I not right? I just like that interaction of that scene. It was cool.
So then Jesus is watching a shepherd work with a few flock members, and Judas approaches, and Jesus is just like totally appreciating the work of this shepherd. And he's just, as Judas walks up, Jesus just giddily is like, oh, see, he's calling them by name. He just loves what's happening with this shepherd.
Yeah.
Which was great.
Yep.
But Judas comes out with this very bold statement.
Yeah.
And, is talking about how he doesn't want Jesus to be held back. He's like, you told us to be gentle as doves, but wise as serpents, right? Is that not wisdom? And, Judas starts to share his donation point idea, but Jesus cuts him off, and he's like, hey, I'm doing this sermon tomorrow. Pay really close attention to my words.
Yep. And the feelings that reside inside of you are inside of you. I liked that setup there. It was good.
So then we're back with Jairus, and he greets Zebedee, who's coming up with another shipment of oil, urges him to come inside right away, and talks about how Yusuf has shared this plot against Jesus, talks about the Beersheba dispute, and Zebedee's like, what does that have to do with anything? He's like, it doesn't have anything to do with anything. They probably don't even know anything about Jesus. They're just trying to leverage this to get what they want, which is crazy and also feels totally realistic. But Zebedee needs to get word to his sons about the threat, and he's like, cool, who's going to do that? And Jairus is like, isn't that obvious? It's got to be you, man.
Yeah, I thought that was, I'm interested what they're potentially doing with this setup. They are definitely trying to distance, at least in this dialogue and a couple others. Like, they don't even know who Jesus is. Like, they have their own agendas. Like, it's not even directly pointed. I have a hard time necessarily squaring that with what I read in the Gospels. There's like maybe one or two references that might kind of back up that kind of it's tricky. So we did this in the podcast. It's very tricky. We're headed towards the cross and the crucifixion and the whole who's going to be responsible for killing Jesus. And historically speaking, it's very tricky. It's the easy way out is to blame empire and Rome. I don't just mean empire from a Bema language kind of way, but like I'm in grad school right now studying at liberal arts institution that empire is very much an academic reference. It's very easy to just throw this at Rome, but there's, very, very deliberately in the Gospels, there's a very religious corruption, religious leadership component, but to do that is so tricky because of all the anti-Semitism. So I'm trying to figure out what they potentially could be. That whole idea is weird to me. They probably don't even know his teachings. Like they're not even concerned about Jesus. Man, as I read it in the Gospels, they're very concerned about Jesus very specifically. And they've also shown that too, because in the Sanhedrin, they have directly and named Jesus by name. So it's just an interesting dance there between the characters and the committees and the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the plot. They're pulling together, and maybe the beauty of it is that complex. Like there are all these different groups and players. It's not one monolithic effort, and there's a collision of a lot of different things. So, but I did write that down. Like, man, they don't know who Jesus is or anything about his teachings. That feels weird. But yeah, maybe.
Yeah, specifically the people who are doing the Beersheba thing don't know about it. Not that they're necessarily saying anybody else does.
Yeah.
But there's, later on, like we have the scene with Gadara and Zebediah and Ozem, and I think maybe a couple other Pharisees or Sanhedrin or whatever they are. And Ozem was like, oh, well, I heard him in the Decapolis.
Sure.
And he was feeding all these people, but I didn't get close enough to get a good look at him. So I don't know for sure if that's him.
Right.
Which that kind of makes sense. Like some of them are aware of what he's doing, but they couldn't pick him out of a lineup.
Yeah.
And then other people are, certainly more familiar with him than that.
Yeah.
Like Shmuel and Yusuf.
Yep.
So, yeah, I think it's just kind of a mix of things.
Yep.
Yeah. And that complexity will continue to unfold as we progress, I guess.
Yeah.
But then we're back with the disciples again. Now they're doing Psalm 118. And they get up to leave. John and Peter are concerned about Thomas, but they didn't leave Thomas. I can't remember exactly. I didn't write down a very good note there, apparently. But they're on their way. They pay for a ferry to cross the river, and then they're walking through the countryside, and then they approach Jerusalem and head inside to the temple.
Yep.
And then Jesus finds a sheepfold, starts going through the whole John 10 spiel.
Yeah, that was interesting. The sheepfold, and which I totally get it. They're selling, which that's a weird. It's a weird kind of sheep pen to depict out in the middle of nowhere. Like the first time Jesus was watching, I'm just not aware of a sheepfold sheep pen that would have functioned that way out. I want to say in the wild. That's not the right expression, but in the temple courts, maybe this temporary makeshift. They're selling sacrificial animals there. So, that part made sense, but just the image of it in the middle of the Temple Mount, I was like, whoa, what's going on here? But definitely was a great connection to the teaching, the shepherd, the earlier scene. Liked how that got pulled together.
Yeah, the one out in the wild, as you say. I think maybe that was like next to somebody's house kind of thing, because it was apparently a close enough walk where Judas knew where Jesus was and like went right out to him.
Yeah.
So it seems like the kind of thing where it's like, oh, the guy brought his sheep home for the night, throws him in the pen, goes into his house, comes back out, and he's just headed out for the day, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, you just typically wouldn't use something like that for that. You'd have your own courtyard at your house, or you'd have a stone-made sheepfold out in the bed. Like my brain is like, maybe if it's more mobile, if he's taking it to, like they're taking these sacrifices to Jerusalem, and maybe you don't have sheepfolds along the way, like an inn along the way. Maybe you have a more mobile sheepfold, like a pack and play, like a pack and play for sheep. I don't know.
Pack and play for
maybe.
sheep. Sure, why not? But we see a couple Pharisees or something are standing there, and I don't know if they were getting ready to pick out a sheep or what they were doing exactly, but they see Jesus walk up, and they start to watch him closely, and the disciples are like, "Hey, Jesus, can you speak a little more plainly?" And so Jesus kind of does, I guess, and the Sanhedrin begin to gather all of their members, and Gadara and Zebediah are arguing about something. They notice the others gathering, so they move over to Jesus. And so then there's kind of a crowd of these guys behind the disciples, and Judas is getting distracted by Ozim's comments, and Peter's like, "Hey man, pay attention, you're missing what Jesus," and Jesus did tell him to pay close attention, and it's like the most distracted one of the bunch is Judas, of course.
I like Peter's resoluteness here. Like a player that's been coached up and is like, okay, like I'm going to make a lot of mistakes, but I'm dialed in right now. Like, and it was on purpose. It wasn't like he couldn't see everything else going on, but he was resolutely determined to listen to his rabbi, get the other people to do it. He's being that leader. Like I like that. I really like that in his character.
Yeah. And it's almost like he almost thinks of it maybe as a test. Like, hey, I know that we're in the middle of the temple and there is a lot going on. Like that means we need to pay all the closer attention, be all the more focused on what he's saying.
Yeah.
But then these guys are talking behind them, and they're just like completely incredulous at what Jesus is saying. They're talking about getting Shammai, but apparently he's on vacation. And then they're arguing in this tight circle, and in this moment, Jesus and the disciples slip away, which was great. I loved that. And then they're walking through, what do you call that? The colonnade?
Yep, Solomon's colonnade. At least that's the same kind of colonnade. Yep.
And the Sanhedrin catch up to him and confront him. Gadara's like, "Oh, this is capital punishment stuff." They start gathering stones, which Dallas made a comment about that in the roundtable.
I'm all ears. Go ahead.
The idea is that the stones would have been readily available in the temple because the temple was under construction at the time.
Okay, sure. Yes, absolutely, sure. I have like loads of problems with everything going on here. This is like just absolute chaos in this scene. It's not how stoning works in a Jewish world at all. That you would stone somebody on the Temple Mount is crazy to me. I mean, the text does at times kind of read that way or insinuate that that's where this is taking place. Just the whole thing is like, this is not how stoning works. I'm getting ahead of you, but they just start slinging stones like into the mess of disciples. How James is going to get hit. I'm like, what is going on right now? Like this is definitely not how Jewish stoning works, especially if you have Pharisees around that have been as concerned about protocol as they have been. Goodness, but
yeah,
it's not one of my favorite scenes on this. The whole stone slinging weirdness, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the way the text reads, they only mention the stones one time, and it says, again, his Jewish opponents picked up stones to stone him, but Jesus said to them, "I have shown you many good works from the Father. For which of these do you stone me?" And then it says, "We are not stoning you for any good work, but for blasphemy."
Is that coming from John?
This is all John, yeah.
And are they on the Temple Mount when this happens in John?
Well, let's see. Where does it say that? Then came the festival of dedication at Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus was in the temple courts walking in Solomon's colonnade.
Well,
the Jews who were there gathered around him, saying, "How long will you keep us in suspense?"
I mean, there you go. If you're pulling those details together, Dallas has got a pretty good pretty good proof text supporting that. So the whole, I still have a problem with just the wild slinging of stones, but I mean, the place and location is, we can pull it right there. I think John plays fast and loose with his time and his details so much that who knows, but yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Yeah,
I can appreciate him putting it. I mean, they've really stuck it right as John says it. And I loved how I continue to be impressed how they work the dialogue into this. Like in the midst of the chaos, like I've done so many good works for Which One Are You Stoning Me? Great way to work that line in.
All of it felt so natural, as opposed to my, slight discomfort earlier in the season with Elizabeth quoting her stuff from the Gospels, which it's not like she delivered it poorly. It just felt more like it was straight out of the text versus this. Like, if you don't know the Gospels, you don't even know any of this stuff is in there necessarily, because they're just
right.
And maybe that's just because these actors have just been doing this for multiple seasons, and Elizabeth is a relatively minor character and only has the one scene, but whatever.
And I'm not sure, Brent, if we've even talked about the process of stoning. Jewish stoning had an absolute process to it. We know that when somebody was stoned, there's an accusation. Now, and if it was just the Sadducees or the chief priests, I mean, you know how corrupt I think they are. So, but depicted in the scene here, you've got Pharisees at least around or involved, and Pharisees literally throwing stones. You're supposed to have two witnesses. They have to bear testimony. Like earlier, they did it. The scene they did earlier, was it season 2 when he's at Nazareth and they go to stone him?
Right.
That was perfect. They take him out. There are witnesses. You have to have two witnesses. You're going to bind the person being stoned. You're going to push them off of a large building or a hill. And then every person gets one stone, and you get a drop. It can be as big as you want. You can throw it or drop it on top of them. They're going to be below you. That's more the issue I have of just like there's a bucket of stones and it feels like a water balloon fight to me, where they're just like everybody's hucking stones everywhere. And you have an unaccused person. Like they would have been, according to Jewish law, like just so much trouble for what happens to James. James isn't the accused. Jesus is like, right. It was just kind of like this crazy, like chaotic, uncontrolled. And that's not how stoning works. And yeah, just anyway, enough.
Considering the chaos of it, it's amazing that only Big James.
Sure.
I mean,
yes.
They do kind of like make some mentions. It seems like maybe little James was also hit.
Yep.
Mary makes some comments like Jesus was maybe hit and a little bit bruised, but not like Big James definitely got the worst of it. But it just seems like, man, and in the chaos of that scene, it is amazing that it wasn't so much worse than it was portrayed.
Sure.
The line that Jesus says that actually gets them to throw the stones the first time, like that starts the whole thing off, is when he says, "I and the Father are one."
Yep.
And that's the line where in the gospel, well, let's see, where does it say that? Yeah, so in John it says, "But if I do them, even though you do not believe me, believe the works, that you may know and understand that the Father is in me and I in the Father." And then again they tried to seize him, but he escaped their grasp. So,
I mean, golly, when you read just the John account they're working with, I got to give them credit. I mean, they created a scene that stays really closely tied to what it feels like you're reading there. So,
yeah, and immediately after that it says, "Then Jesus went back across the Jordan to the place where John had been baptizing in the early days."
Sure.
And that part, that was the one.
Man, the more you keep reading the Bible, Brent, the more I'm like, all right. There you go. You got me. Absolutely. Sure.
Yeah. The I and the Father are one line comes right before it actually says in John, again, his Jewish opponents picked up stones to stone him.
Yeah.
What is it? Dr. Huffman? Is that his name? The evangelical scholar on their round table. He was like, you got to be kidding me. They were on the other side of the Jordan, and then they cross over and walk 25 miles to Jerusalem just to have this little conversation. And then they're going all 25 miles back. And then they're going to go 23 miles the next day back to Bethany. But I don't know. That is quite a journey for sure.
Yeah.
A little bit of compression of time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's John being John, and that's the challenge for Dallas and the team to try to figure out how they stay true to that. But I mean, yeah.
So in the midst of this whole situation, like Big James is hit, of course, they're continuing to argue as the stones are thrown. There's brief pauses in the throwing. Jesus continues to deliver his message, continues to confront them with different things. Judas is totally bewildered in this whole thing. He's like, what is going on? Why doesn't Jesus use the power that he apparently has to just take over in this situation? Why is this not being successful? This, he kind of thought oh, is this the moment? This is where we're going to confront them. This is where we're going to take charge, but no. And then they get out of there, basically.
Yep, totally.
So finally, we're back in the house as in the opening scene. And the thing that Z was shouting about earlier turned out to be Zebedee's arrival. He's like, whoa, what's going on here? Obviously, his son is hurt, and Jesus shares the note that he had picked up with Mary. And then Mary shares with the rest of the group that Lazarus has died. Then we go into the whole John 11 conversation. So, I mean, they're really sticking straight with the text here.
Yep.
The whole conversation, Lazarus has fallen asleep. I'm going to go wake him up. All sorts of confusion about that. But then we have this really intimate moment after that where Mary and Jesus are talking and they're sharing their hurts. And Jesus, was like, oh, the reason you hurt the way that I do is because you've been listening to what I've been saying, which I thought was amazing.
Yeah, I wrote that line down. It was so good, not just as a piece of screenwriting, but just the character of Mary, both in the show and in the scripture. I don't want to get ahead of myself and spoil next episode, so I'll keep some of those comments to they've done a really good job of working there was a point, it was either last season or early this season, where I was like, man, what's happened to Mary Magdalene? She's kind of gone away. And they really do some cool things with Mary this episode, especially next episode, to set up the part she's going to play later. And I love that she has this. She gets it. She's listening, not just listening, but understanding. She gets this on levels that everybody else is missing. All the guys, all the boys are missing, but she gets it. She has some insight, and I do love that a lot.
Yeah, and I'll have, I think, a few more comments along those lines in the next episode as well. So
absolutely,
that's pretty much the end. Zebedee shares the news from Jairus, from Yusuf. We're really getting into the game of telephone here, but Zebedee shares that with James and John, and then that is the end of the episode.
Absolutely. I think it's I had my moments. It won't be my favorite episode, but there were some really cool pieces too, and I do really appreciate how they work in the dialogue, how they're staying true to John 10 and 11. They really pulled 2 whole chapters together really well in this episode, and details aside, I really impressed with how because the synoptics are one thing, but they really go back and forth between synoptic records and John. They're not afraid to use John, which is tricky because John is not usually seen as your most historical of your gospels, but they do a great job with it.
And this one, pretty much followed things right down the line. So
yep.
A whole lot of text in this episode, which is something we always appreciate.
We like it.
Makes us think, makes us consider how we viewed things in the past, which is basically, I think, the reason we're doing this is to reconsider. Have we actually seen these texts the way we want to see them?
It's the power of the art medium we're using and looking at.
All right, so that's our episode for today. You can go to BaymontDiscipleship.com to find details about our show. Check the show notes for this episode on the website or in your podcast app. Check out Marty's YouTube video on Hanukkah if you want some more information on that. Do a little deep dive, and you can, of course, get in touch with us through the website. All that stuff is available. So thanks for joining us on the Baymont Podcast. We'll talk to you again soon.